A few years back, I received the galleys of a book in the mail from a publisher. And the galleys, as many of you probably know, is the unfinished book. And this publisher asked me if I would write a blurb for this book. Dear Mr. Haygood, we think this book is going to be important, and we would like you to read it. And we'd be honored if you would offer a blurb to go on the back of the book. And the book was Devil in the Grove. And I read the book. And I was mightily impressed. And I wrote a blurb that appeared on the back of the book. Even as I was, at the time, embarking on my own Thurgood Marshall book. So the book comes out and does well, and Gilbert King wins the Pulitzer Prize. Now, when I was at the Boston Globe, I was a Pulitzer Prize runner-up. And I'm thinking Gilbert wins in the Pulitzer Prize, perhaps based on my beautiful, poetic, eloquent blurb. I'm wondering, have I sabotaged myself? Certainly the judges aren't going to give 2 Pulitzer Prizes to 2 Thurgood Marshall books in a 3-year period. So I've actually come here tonight to say to Gilbert King, if you should think in the back of your heart that you owe me half of your Pulitzer Prize, then I can put it with the Pulitzer Prize runner-up that I won, and I myself would leave Dayton as a Pulitzer Prize winner. Be that as it may, I was exuberantly happy to endorse Gilbert King's book. Gilbert King, the runner-up for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize 2013 award in nonfiction, is the author, as I just said, of Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall, The Groveland Boys in the Dawn of a New America. A New York Times bestseller, the book also won the Pulitzer Prize in 2013. Gilbert is a member of the DLPP Honorary Advisory Board and was one of the keynote presenters at UD Law School's Justice on Trial Symposium and an Evening for Justice and Peace at the Victoria Theater on Friday. He has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Pacific Standard. King lives in New York City with his wife, 2 daughters, and a French bulldog named Louis. He is also one of the kindest and sweetest gentlemen you will ever meet. Ladies and gentlemen, Gilbert King.
So much fun. Thank you. It's so great to be back here and to see so many familiar faces once again. Sharon, as usual, thank you. You are a hell of a writer. That was a very beautiful address that you gave earlier, and you should get some recognition. That was very powerful. A few years ago, Adam Johnson came onto the stage, and after listening to some inspirational writers, he admitted with a sigh, "I need to be a better person. I think I can do better. My work should be more important." Well, Adam's work obviously is important, but I'm reminded of Adam's words every time I come to Dayton. The books that are awarded and recognized at the Dayton Literary Peace Prize challenge us. Their subjects are often painful, tragic, horrific, and simply put, not easy books to dive into sometimes. We often have enough of an understanding of the world events to know what we may be in for. But what we sometimes forget is that there is deeply affecting beauty in narrative in the hands of gifted storytellers. I think it's so important to remember this. In Susan Southard's book, Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War, I was struck by one such moment. From the second I crack open this book, I knew what was coming, yet I found my heart pounding as I read, as Susan brought this narrative closer and closer to the morning of August 9th, 1945, just after 11 a.m., when an American bomber soared above this fateful port city in southern Japan with a population of 250,000 citizens. I was unprepared for the moment Susan described in the seconds before the detonation. Yoshida, a 13-year-old boy, was standing by the Urakami River when he looked up and spotted 3 parachutes in the sky above, parachutes that carried equipment to measure the data and blast pressure of the coming detonation. Quietly, the parachutes floated down, with Yoshida and his friends shielding their eyes from the sun as they followed these peaceful parachutes in the seconds before everything would change. It is that moment of beauty, that moment of tranquility, that makes other scenes in Susan's book so poignant. Moments, she writes, where, quote, tiny barefoot children squatted in the ruins and wandered through the debris and corpses, calling out for their mothers and fathers. In Susan's magnificent book, she centers her narrative around the lives of children like Yoshida, Wada, and teenage schoolgirls Do and Nagano. These are the hibakusha, the survivors of the bomb who were badly injured and disfigured, and who must live their lives with the stigma not only of their physical appearance, but societal fears that they may pass on genetic diseases or that the radiation they absorbed might be contagious. Eventually, they became kataribe, storytellers who come out to tell their personal narratives of survival and of the horrors of nuclear weapons. In storytelling, the kataribe bring meaning and usefulness to their lives, their own lives, by carrying a mission of peace around the world, to dispel propaganda, increase awareness and understanding, to speak the truth as only they can know it. Human beings can argue about the political implications and complexities of the existence of nuclear weapons in the world today, but what we know from reading Susan's book is that there can be no disputing the horrific effect of these weapons on our fellow human beings. This book is vital to the world today because despite the abundance of information available to us, we live in a time of misunderstanding, of willful ignorance, of complacency. This is why it's so important that the Dayton Literary Peace Prize challenges us with books like Susan's. We are all better human beings for reading books like Nagasaki, Life After the Nuclear War, because in essence, as readers and citizens, we become katarabi in our own communities, in our own classrooms, absorbing and dispensing ideas and truths, and planting seeds of peace and understanding in our fellow human beings. On behalf of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, it's my honor to introduce this year's winner in nonfiction, Susan Southard. Congratulations.
I think that I don't need to speak now. I've never had someone speak about my book as you just did, Gilbert. Thank you. It's been a long journey, this book. And first I'd like to thank you all, Sharon and Mark, and all of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize staff and board and volunteers for this remarkable honor. I offer my deepest gratitude to Do Mineko, Nagano Etsuko, Taniguchi Sumiteru, Wada Koichi, and Yoshida Katsuji, and their families who trusted me with their stories, and to the many other Nagasaki survivors, physicians, and atomic bomb specialists who helped me over 12 years to tell this story as fully and truthfully as possible. I would like to also thank Melanie Tortoroli and the entire editorial staff at Viking, Robin Lavoie, an extraordinary researcher who helped me fulfill my vision for the book, and my family here tonight at table 37, Gary and Sue Southard, my parents, thank you for applauding them. Gosh. And my daughter, Eva Black, who traveled with me to Nagasaki on my first research trip in 2003 and videotaped my interviews when she was 10 years old and grew up with this book. On the morning of August 9th, 1945, 3 days after the nuclear attack on Hiroshima, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, a city built around a long, narrow bay on Japan's southernmost island of Kyushu. As the 5-ton plutonium bomb plunged toward the city, I can't believe you mentioned Yoshida so much. His story is what I'm going to say a bit about tonight. 13-year-old Yoshida Katsuji was lowering a bucket into a well on the side of a road. A super brilliant flash lit up the sky, and the colossal power of that single bomb crushed homes, offices, schools, and hospitals, killing and trapping family members, friends, co-workers, and neighbors for miles. The force of the blast caused people's eyes to pop out of their sockets. Glass shards and wooden fragments bulleted through their skin, puncturing muscles and organs. Larger doses of radiation than any human had ever received penetrated deeply into the bodies of people and animals. Directly beneath the bomb, infrared heat rays instantly carbonized human and animal flesh and vaporized internal organs. As the heat wave surged outward from the center, it melted iron, steel, and human skin and caused fires to break out across the city, resulting in conflagrations that burned people alive. It all happened in an instant, Yoshida remembered. He had been facing in the direction of the bomb when the tremendous blast force hurled him backwards 130 feet before he landed on his back in a shallow rice paddy. Lying beneath the rising mushroom cloud, Yoshida didn't know that a huge portion of Nagasaki had vanished and tens of thousands of people were already dead. For the rest of the world, the war ended on August 15, 1945, but for the Hibakusha, atomic bomb-affected people, the chilling after effects of nuclear war continued. Thousands experienced excruciating symptoms and often death from their whole-body radiation exposure. Pregnant women whose fetuses had been exposed in utero suffered spontaneous abortions, stillbirths, and infant deaths, and many of the babies who survived birth developed physical and mental disabilities. For years, the extreme psychological anguish from the instantaneous disappearance of their city and the loss of entire families and communities never lifted. Suicides were common. Increased rates of leukemia, cancers, and other diseases followed the survivors for decades, keeping them on edge, wondering when their turn would come. Even today, scientists are actively studying second and third generation hibakusha for genetic effects potentially passed down to them from their parents and grandparents, reminding us of how much we still don't know about the insidious nature of radiation exposure to the human body. On the day after the bombing, Yoshida's parents found him unconscious, his face and body brutally scorched. For the next 4 months, his mother cared for him day and night as he lay unconscious in their home on the other side of the mountains from the hypocenter. In December 1945, Yoshida finally received medical care for the first time at a naval hospital far north of the city. The burns on the left side of his face and body slowly improved, but the right side of his face remained scabbed and infected, and his burned right ear eventually rotted and fell off. Doctors performed 3 skin graft surgeries, 2 of which failed, and finally released Yoshida from the hospital in early 1947. He was 15. For the rest of his life, Yoshida struggled to eat because he could barely open his mouth. His hands remained permanently curled up in fists, frozen in the position they were in the moment of the atomic blast. He hid himself inside his house for years, panicked at the prospect of people's stares and shocked expressions when they glimpsed his face. Over and over again, he questioned why this had happened to him, why he hadn't been given a chance to hide from the bomb. At readings I do across the country and through emails and letters to me, people's response to the book frequently reflects the United States official narrative about the atomic bombings, that the bombs ended the war and saved 1 million American lives and countless Japanese lives as well by preventing an Allied land invasion of the Japanese home islands later that year. That their own lives, or their fathers, grandfathers, uncles, or brothers' lives were saved by the bombs. I've heard the atomic bombings described as, quote, tragic acts of mercy, end quote. People remind me with great emotional intensity about Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese soldiers' atrocities in China, and their torture and killing of Allied POWs. Putting aside the complex historical analysis of the military necessity of the bombings and their connection, or not, to Japan's surrender, what I say is this. Yes, the Japanese military attacked the United States, triggering a relentless and costly war in the Pacific. Yes, Japanese soldiers pillaged, raped, and murdered thousands of civilians as they forced their way through China. Yes, the Japanese military tortured and killed Allied POWs. Yes. And during the war, the United States and its allies bombed and incinerated all or part of 64 Japanese cities, killing more than 180,000 Japanese men, women, and children. And then we waged nuclear war on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing 225,000 more people in those 2 cities by the end of 1945, and injuring and irradiating tens of thousands more. All of these truths coexist. One is not more true than the other. One is not justification for the other. Can we hold multiple truths at the same time? Can we, as individuals and as a nation, have the courage to acknowledge, understand, and empathize with people in our own country or abroad whom we have profoundly hurt? For me, this kind of accountability, the deep and arduous effort to understand the impact of our actions on others, is an act of beauty. How much more beautiful might our nation become if we paid fierce and unflinching attention to the other side of the story, if we included the survivors' experiences in our national memory and narrative of the atomic bombings. From the early post-war years on, a small group of hibakusha have chosen to defy social norms and speak publicly about their atomic bomb experiences. They stand before the world as witnesses to nuclear war, providing understanding that no one else can give. They tell their stories to reduce vague notions about nuclear weapons and increase understanding of the enduring impact of nuclear war. Above all else, they have worked tirelessly for 7 decades to ensure that Nagasaki is the last atomic-bombed city in history. Yoshida Katsuji admired these activists and thought of them as pioneers, but for years he remained silent, terrified of people's stares and what he thought was their revulsion. Later in life, however, in his ongoing effort to accept his disfigurement, Yoshida came to terms with the fact that he could not change what had happened to him or how he looked, and he decided to no longer let his shyness get in the way of speaking out for peace. In 2007, at the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum, 75-year-old Yoshida stands before a large group of junior high school students and begins to tell his story. Scar tissue covers his face and neck, and a large black patch covers the right side of his head where his ear used to be. He is nearly bald, his smile reveals severely misshapen teeth, and behind large framed glasses, Yoshida's eyes are uneven, one higher than the other. To help the students feel more comfortable, he likens his incredible good looks to those of Kimutaku, a handsome Japanese pop star from the 1990s. And I should say, a colleague of his suggested that as time went on, the comparison to Kimutaku wasn't as funny to the children anymore because Kimutaku was now in his 40s, and suggested that maybe he find a younger pop star to compare his looks to. And Yoshida never did, except once when he was in Chicago, when he told the students that he was speaking that he knew he was as handsome as Leonardo DiCaprio. This is what I say to children, he explains. Have you ever looked up heiwa, peace, in the dictionary? They never have. They've never looked it up because we don't need to know what peace is during peacetime. Let's look it up together, he says to the children. He pauses and adds emphatically, our greatest enemy is carelessness. We need to pay attention to peace. And so I thank you again for this enormous honor, and thank you to the Dayton Literary Peace Prize and to all of you here tonight for paying attention to peace. Thank you.